Last week's waivers had plenty of hits. Juwan Jennings, Sam Darnold, Zach Charbonnet, Zach Moss, Khalil Shakir, and the Packers DST all start in week 3, straight off our waiver wire. But who should you pick up this week as those dastardly buys appear? Find out next on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. We're 3 weeks into the season, and bye weeks are already just around the corner. So there's no more important time to get those waivers right and make sure that your bench and your starters are as strong as they can be. Today, we're talking the waiver wire, and I'll be taking you through the best players in every position that you can probably find on the waiver wire in your league, no matter how deep or shallow your league is. If you haven't already, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. If you want to catch up, our Instagram is at the Fantasy First Down. You can message us there and we'll answer all your questions, or you can just pop your questions below in the comment section. You can also follow us on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. And of course, my rankings are at ffdfantasyfootball.com. They come out every Thursday and get updated over the course of the weekend as well. In addition, you can also check out my articles. I'm bringing out a Streamers and Stashes article each week on football.rasball.com. Plus, you can also find out my slot versus wide analysis that comes out on Thursdays on the website. So let's get into the waiver wire for this week. And as usual, we're talking through all the best pickups by position because we're a little bit deeper into the season. Instead of having a look at just their last week's production, I'm having a look at where they ranked last week and for the season, plus looking at their ownership percentage. That is off Yahoo, which is not the most accurate, but it is the best that I can find out there. And my favorite QB pickup, and it has been for a while, still Sam Darnold. He's looked fantastic. He's the QB4 on the season, and he's available in the majority of leagues. So many people complaining about the production they're getting out of, I don't know, Anthony Richardson. Maybe you had Jordan Love or Tua, and you're just struggling for QB production. Pick up Sam Darnold. He faces the Packers this week, which isn't the toughest matchup, but he's making it work every single week. Another guy I really like is Kirk Cousins. He's going to struggle again this week against New Orleans, but when those bye weeks hit, he is going to be fantastic. He gets a way easier run after week 4. It's been very difficult for him so far this season. That's why he struggled to a QB 24 season ranking, but he's actually played pretty darn well. And he's gotten the team, well, at least that big win we saw last week. So there is more certainly to come. And I do think that even though I wouldn't start him this week, he's someone that I definitely want on my bench if I need a second player and I'm planning a little bit ahead in a deeper league in particular. Caleb Williams is more of a streamer for this week. He takes on the Rams, who we've seen you can score a lot of points on through the air. Brock Purdy did a fantastic job against them last week, and he did look better this week. If he gets Keenan Allen back, that is an added bonus as well. And finally, Trevor Lawrence. I know what you're thinking. Trevor Lawrence looked absolutely awful last week. Yeah, he did. And he faces Houston, who I think will give him an opportunity to bounce back. Still talking about a very talented player. He does get Evan Ingram back soon enough as well. I think he can turn it around. But gosh, if he can't, he is being badly overpaid. So let's talk about the running backs. And I split these up based on how deep the league you're going to find them in is. But realistically, if any of these shallows are available even in a deeper league, still make sure you pick them up. Zach Moss is the obvious start. You should have picked him up last week. He was on the waiver wire list then as well. He still remains available in some leagues. He's the clear starter there. Chase Brown did actually look quite good and could threaten his workload. He is technically a sell high, I think, in a deeper league, Zach Moss, but after this week, because he's going to have a good week against Carolina. Most players do, unless you're a Raiders running back named Zamir White. I don't know what the deal was with that. Jerome Ford went back to having all the carries last week. That was really weird. Donta Foreman came in and had like 14 carries in week 2 and then was barely involved in week 3. So Ford remains the lead guy there. He is someone that you can pick up and use on a weekly basis. He gets a good matchup that Chuba Hubbard managed to smash last week, and Jerome Ford is a significantly better player. Carson Steele is clearly the early down and most importantly the goal line running back for the Chiefs. Pirine will be involved on passing downs, and we don't know what impact Kareem Hunt's going to have. But I do think probably Steele is going to be the main guy, and Hunt's probably more likely to impact the passing down and maybe change of pace back. role. I do think Carson Steele is still the main guy in that offense. So he is someone that you can use. He's particularly valuable in a non-PPR and a half PPR league. And then Jonathan Brooks, of course. Realistically, if you're in a deeper league where you're looking for a little bit less upside, you're better off with those earlier guys. But the shallower your league gets, Brooks actually has more upside relative to those guys. But he doesn't have a lot because it's still Carolina. So I do think later on in the season, towards the end of the season, Brooks could be a good player, and he's available in quite a few leagues. If you don't have an IR spot, this is around the time where you need to pick him up. If you've got an IR spot, he's obviously not available. Someone will have drafted him, put him in the IR slot. Deeper running backs, Rico Dowdle has clearly taken over the lead job in Dallas. To be fair, not a particularly valuable lead job, but Zeke's snaps have been decreasing every week. Juice Vaughn getting involved is a bit of an issue, but I do think if the Cowboys can start winning and playing a little bit better, that it will increase the value of their running backs, but they do need to improve that O-line. They need to get the run game going, but it would help if they had the lead first. So Dowdle is someone that you can start, and he is available in deeper leagues and available in over half the leagues. These are all guys that you could feasibly start in a deeper league if you're a little bit desperate, but they're still available in over half of leagues, which is obviously a difficult thing to find, especially if the season goes on. Bucky Irving, we've seen is splitting carries with Rashad White. His carries are increasing and he's running better, but they do still prefer White, especially on passing downs. But you can feasibly start Bucky Irving, especially on a bye week if you're in a bind. After all, he was the RB24 last week, and he's the RB34 on the season. Braylon Allen, we've seen the same thing. He's been very good the last 2 weeks. And he could remain that way because he's going to get a lot of touches against Denver, because you'd have to feel as significant favorites that they're going to get a lead and keep it, and therefore want to take some of the load off Hall by using Braylon Allen. Plus, he's just definitively the best handcuff in the league as well. If Breece Hall goes down, he's going to be a top 5 option, which is why he was one of my favorite handcuffs and a guy I was talking about getting late in every single draft throughout the preseason. Finally, Justice Hill. There's more of a deeper starting option, a deep starting option. Don't really want to start him in general, but this coming week, he is actually more of a feasible option because he's playing against Buffalo, and they're probably going to be behind. And when they're behind, they use a whole lot more Justice Hill and a whole lot less Derrick Henry. And you can run on Buffalo. So I do feel like we're going to see some more Hill than we usually do. Still not the greatest option, but if you're desperate and you're looking for deep starting options, he's one I'd go for. Now, if you don't need a starter and you just want someone to put on your bench, well, go back here. Okay, get an Irving or an Allen. They're still the best stashes. Allen in particular is the best. But if you're looking a little bit deeper, or you just want guys that you can stick on your bench and then bring in if the right thing happens, and that's how you should be using your bench. They should have upside players on there as well that with the right situation can become stars. I think Tyler Algier is probably one of the best handcuff options behind guys like Allen and Irving. He has got no chance of actually taking the lead role, but if something happens to Bijan Robinson, all of a sudden you've got a top 10 running back. We've seen him produce like that when there's no Bijan a couple of seasons ago. Ray Davis falls into that same category. If you have no James Cook, all of a sudden Davis is the main guy, with Ty Johnson taking some of the passing downs. For that reason, Davis has a lot of upside. Arguably, you could even argue that Trey Sermon probably belongs ahead of him, but has less week-to-week value. So if you're looking for zero value right now and you just want upside, arguably Trey Sermon's one of the most valuable handcuffs because he's pretty good and the O-line is fantastic. They're going to run the ball a lot, even when they don't have Jonathan Taylor there. We saw that game where Taylor was out and Zach Moss was out, and they used a heap of Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson. They still ran the ball a heap. It is going to be Sermon this time. It's well past Goodson. He is a fantastic handcuff option. And finally, Antonio Gibson. We saw him get a little bit of production when the game got out of hand last week. That's not really what I'm picking him up for. I'm more picking him up for if Ramondre Stevenson goes down, all of a sudden he's a valuable handcuff. There are a couple of other options around the place as well, but these are my favorite guys. Okay, let's talk wide receivers. One of the most shallow options, I guess, is Brian Thomas Jr. We know he's good. He is arguably their number one option. He wasn't this week. Christian Kirk was because of the preferable slot matchup in that game against Buffalo. We knew that coming in. I even talked about it in the slot versus wide show, and I talked about it in on the start sit show for Rasball. So if you're looking at either of those, you would have known that Christian Kirk was the guy to start and not Thomas. But Thomas is a guy you want on your roster. He's still got a lot of upside. And if Trevor Lawrence can get things together, all of a sudden Thomas increases in value. He could start this week against a Houston offense that you can attack through the air. Deontay Johnson is playing against Cincinnati, which is usually spelt with a C, but apparently not on my keyboard. Um, he was fantastic this week. Kind of saw that coming. He was my number one stash in my streamers and stashes article. I did think that we were heading in this direction with Andy Dalton, and that's the way it turned out. His snap count has risen. He's the number one guy there. He is someone you definitely want in your lineup if he's available. Roma Dunze has been solid, but he's got a lot of upside. We saw as soon as Keenan Allen was out, all of a sudden he had a very strong week. Got the touchdown this week, obviously, but also got plenty of targets. He's still behind DJ Moore, and Keenan Allen coming in will affect him, but he's still someone that I want in my team if he's available. And finally, Khalil Shakir does appear to be the number one guy in Buffalo at the moment. The lack of Keon Coleman was really bizarre. Apparently, he was being punished by being sat out in the first quarter, but they also didn't play him consistently throughout the rest of the game. And he still scored a touchdown on his only reception. It was a really weird situation. Hard to trust him, but I would not remove him from my bench. Khalil Shakir, on the other hand, is the number one starter there. He was a deeper waiver option last week. He obviously had a big week. So he, once again, he is going to be owned in a lot more leagues. So I would pick him up. His snap count is rising, and that is very beneficial for him. Okay. Deeper guys, Juwan Jennings somehow still available in the majority of leagues. I had him as one of my favorite deeper waiver options last week, and he went off as the wide receiver 1, scoring 52 PPR points. I'm making him the wide receiver 2 on the season, which is insane. That's not going to happen again, but he is still a solid starting option. Darnell Mooney has proven to be the clear number 2 wide receiver in Atlanta, and they're not really using a lot of Kyle Pitts at the moment. So Darnell Mooney does have a valid, viable role, and I do think they're going to pass the ball more after this week's game. I wouldn't necessarily start him this week, but he's someone I want on my bench in a deeper league. Romeo Doubs, again, is only going to be useful once Jordan Love's back. He's actually on the field for the most snaps of all of the Packers wide receivers. I do think potentially that he could have some value once Jordan Love is back. But again, don't start him yet. And finally, Alec Pierce. He does appear to be the number 2 in Indy. Even though Josh Downs came back, he only played in 11 personnel. It was still Pierce out there. We saw something similar happen last year, and Pierce just wasn't used. It is possible he's having that sophomore bump that we see with a lot of wide receivers, or at least we used to see. I think after Jamar Chase's boom start, we kind of got used to this idea that wide receivers are just amazing off the bat. It's not always how it works. Look at Nico Collins' first year, for example. He was like the wide receiver 90-something. So Alec Pierce could just be coming out. Having a bit of a coming out party, but I don't know that that's necessarily what's happening. So I'm willing to put him on my bench and find out. Finally, let's talk some super deep options. All of these guys are owned in less than 10% of leagues. So if you're in a deeper league, they're probably available. So I'm definitely in leagues where none of these guys are available either. In those situations, just don't pick up anyone off waivers. Greg Dortch takes on Washington. That's obviously a great matchup. Didn't have the greatest game last week, but he does still have plenty of upside. Josh Reynolds, clear number 2 option for Denver, who are finally managing to move the ball, but he somehow just managed to not be very involved this week. I do think that'll come around. He's still a solid option. Andre Joseph, he's lower down for me because T. Higgins coming back will eventually start to affect him. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but he gets some pretty solid matchups coming up. I don't think that Carolina is one of the best, though he has scoring upside. I'm just worried about his role. As soon as there's one injury ahead of him, he becomes viable. But he's mostly a red zone target. And finally, Tutu Atwell. I mean, we saw that he suddenly took over from Tyler Johnson, essentially. Tyler Johnson and Jordan Whittington were kind of splitting snaps, and it was Atwell out there most of the time with DeMarcus Robinson. So that obviously increases his value, but it's very temporary. Obviously, once Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are back, probably won't see much about Atwell as well. I think coming into the season, we expected Atwell to be the number 4 guy behind Robinson and obviously the 2 studs, and that's where he sits now. But it was a weird journey where Tyler Johnson and then Jordan Whittington briefly took over, and then Atwell took over from there. Very weird. But he is someone that you can use in the interceding weeks between now and Kupp and Nacua coming back. Tight ends, and gosh, this is so ugly. I'm hating ranking tight ends this year. Tight ends are by far my weakest position. At this point, I'm currently ranked top 5 in accuracy on Fantasy Pros for the season. But with tight ends, I'm ranked like 170th or something. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand why it's happening. I just cannot get tight end ranking right this season, even though I'm doing so well in everything else. I think I'm 2nd in wide receivers and 5th in quarterbacks. Tight ends, just terrible. No idea why. So I don't know what's going on with that, whether it's just me or whether it's just tight ends being so random, but I cannot work out what's happening. So take this with a grain of salt. Dalton Schultz, just sneakily, actually doing quite well this week. Like, wasn't actually getting the results, but snap count wise and route run wise, all of a sudden had a big change. Why? Well, Brevin Jordan's injured. So Brevin Jordan did his ACL, which is very sad for him. Dalton Schultz becomes the number one guy. It's not Cade Stover. He's basically the blocking guy, and the second guy is taking over that Tegan Kitoriano role from last season. But there's no Jordan now to get in the way of Schultz. So, look, they'll bring in someone else, but I don't think they're going to have the same impact that Brevin Jordan did. So Dalton Schultz increases in value for that reason. He should chance to get in early and get him. Cole Kmet arguably is someone that you could take ahead of Schultz. Technically the tight end 2 in the season because he just had one really big week. He's been playing behind Gerald Everett the first 2 weeks and then randomly all of a sudden just had a massive boom week. I think it was like 11 targets, 10 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown. Really weird. Now, there was definitely some garbage time involved there, but he's got a great matchup this week. He takes on the Rams. I think he could have another big week, or Gerald Everett might randomly be ahead of him again because that just seems to be how it's working with tight ends this year. You just don't know, but I certainly don't trust him to keep that every down role this season. Keenan Allen coming back will also really hurt him as well. Colby Parkinson, I keep expecting it to happen for him, and it just hasn't quite happened yet. I feel like maybe this week against Chicago, this might be the week where he finally gets it right. He's getting some targets, not quite producing, or it's not quite happening for him, but I do think that he has that upside. And finally, Brendan Strange. I mean, there have been people saying, oh, maybe he takes over from Evan Ingram. He's a lot younger. He's like 23. Ingram's in his 30s. I don't know. He didn't play very well. He dropped quite a few catches. He was just out of position a couple of times. Look, he's still getting the ball. He's still getting touchdowns. That was a pretty good touchdown route and catch. But I'm very nervous about his chances of keeping that role. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen once Ingram comes back. So this is kind of like a 1 week loner. Finally, let's talk about kicker and DST streamers. Very important thing to do. Last week, we missed, basically. Kickers and DST, we usually get right. But last week, I went double Raiders, and it did not work. Now, I say that. My second streamer was the Packers, and they were the DST one. So if you happen to pick them, you're welcome. If you pick the Raiders, I'm sorry. This week, we'll see if we can make it 3 from 4 for the season. Blake Groupie is my favorite kicker streamer, although he and Evan McPherson are pretty close. Groupie's actually available in more leagues, so he's probably your best bet. He's had a solid season. He was average last week, but he takes on Atlanta. Atlanta's conceded 11 field goals already. They concede 15.3 kicker points per game. No other team averages over 12.6. It's really weird. I do think that there's a part of that is just that big week 1, but it has kind of continued. It's the way their defense seems to work. It seems to just keep on like avoiding those big plays, making teams kind of keep it really simple, and then the drive stalls more often than not, and you end up with a lot of kicked points. So I do think that Atlanta might continue to be someone that we target, and Groupie is the guy facing them this week. He's a good kicker. They don't tend to go for it a lot on 4th downs, especially when Taysom Hill's out. So I do think Groupie's a good option. He's also pretty accurate. Evan McPherson would have had a better week last week if he hadn't missed one of his kicks, but still finishes the kick at 8. He was someone that I had in quite a few leagues. If you're in a shallower league, he'll probably be available. I do like that matchup against Carolina, but I kind of like the Atlanta one a little bit more for a couple of reasons that I mentioned earlier. So up to you who you go for there. Finally, defenses. The Titans have massively improved this season as an actual defense, but it hasn't come through on DST yet. They're not making those big plays. They just haven't had the matchups. But we saw that Miami struggled badly last week against the Packers. They just couldn't, sorry, not against Packers. They just couldn't get anything going at all. And I do think that this week we might find that they're very poor against the Titans. So you probably want to be taking on anyone facing Miami at the moment, and it's the Titans this week. They've got a much improved secondary. They still managed to get sacks. I think they have 8 or 9 on the season, so I think they could have a good week. If they're available, and I think they might be in more leagues because they've been poor the last 2 weeks, so I expect that ownership percentage will actually drop this week after waivers, and you might be able to pick them up. Cowboys take on the Giants. They just had 2 really tough matchups, but we're talking about a team whose DST has been top 2 the last 3 seasons. Poor this season, but I do think they'll bounce back. So if they're available, arguably a better option than the Titans because you know what you can get out of them. I would still personally take the Titans first, though. Now, if you've got any waiver wire questions, make sure you hit us up either in the comments or on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. You can also check us out on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. It would be awesome if you'd like and subscribe on the channel. That really helps us be able to do things like monetize and actually make something out of this. And finally, you can also check out my rankings at ffdfantasyfootball.com. They usually appear on Thursdays and then get updated over the weekend. And finally, my articles are at football.rasball.com. There's a Streamers and Stashes article there at the moment, or at least there will be very soon. And after that, I'll also do a slot versus wide analysis as well. I look forward to catching up with you in a couple of days' time when we will talk Streamers and Stashes on the channel. And then, of course, I'll be back for my Start Sit show as per usual on Friday night, Saturday region. So I look forward to chatting you then.